Nebraska almost upsets Ohio State. Ohio State does escape with the win here, 21-17. What do you see from this game, man? Give me some of your takeaways from this nail biter for this Ohio State team.
So right off the bat, I want to give credit to Raiola and Matt Rule and co. Because they're getting Nebraska back on the map. They used to be a powerhouse. The Ohio State, Nebraska, Michigan, that used to be a really good game that everybody looked forward to, and that was the case this year, and I'm really excited about that. But my key takeaway was, I don't know if you feel the same way, but Nebraska was one interception away from potentially winning this football game. There at the end. Right there at the end. Dylan Raiola throws that one pick, and it seals the deal right there. And also, I think if they would have scored in the first quarter, we would have a different ball game on our hands.
Yes, a lot of points left on the board for Nebraska. Can agree with you there.
Ohio State, to me, did not play like number 4. I mean, either one of two things is true.
Right.
Nebraska is on the cusp of greatness, or Ohio State is suspect. Because the reason I say that is Nebraska's faced 3 top 25 opponents, and we know where they were a couple years ago and even last year. They barely lose to Illinois in overtime. They barely lose this game to Ohio State, the number 4 team in the country. They absolutely get spanked by Indiana, but they've been doing that to everyone. So Ohio State's going to have to worry about Penn State and Indiana. I'm not entirely sold on them. I'm going to be real. At the beginning of the year, the sky was the limit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not so sure. Kind of like Texas for me. I'm a little we'll get to that a little later, but you know, Will Howard and Carnell Tate really saved Ohio State and the defense.
Yeah. No doubt about it. When you talk about Ohio State's schedule, man, you know, they had a lot of, run-through games that we saw them play earlier this year, but then they have the Oregon game. Clearly, they go to the wire against them. They have this Nebraska game. They go to the wire against them. Of course, they're able to win this game against Nebraska. They drop the one to Oregon. Penn State's knocking on the door. They're coming in next. Turn around right afterwards. A couple games later, you got Indiana and then Michigan to end the season. We understand that Michigan is not what they're all cracked up to be, but when you're talking about final game of the year, Ohio State's feeling a little shaky, and it feels like really no team is super out of it, right? So when you see the teams that they're playing coming up on their schedule, man, it's definitely, it is definitely something to keep an eye on, because it's like I've talked about with college football in the past, and even as it goes through this season, like you can have the brunt of your schedule, come on the back end, and if you're just blowing out these teams on the front end, you're really going to see what you're made of in the back end of the season. But I think Nebraska came out about as sloppy as you can in this game. You muffed the opening kickoff inside the 10-yard line, you fumbled a handoff, you shaked a punt, and then it sets OSU up perfectly in plus territory already. But I really wasn't a fan of Ohio State's opening drive in this game either, man. It felt really conservative. They get stood up on 4th and 1, so they absolutely squander that drive there. So there were points left on the board. You got Nebraska coming back out. It feels like they set the tone kind of early in this one. They're stuffing the run, stuffing the 4th down, putting the pressure on Will Howard's ass, and it really just felt like they were controlling that line of scrimmage with the number 4 team in the country that you said didn't necessarily felt like they played up to that number 4 ranking there, considering everything in this game. Now, I thought it was really a defensive showdown to start off as well. Plenty of underneath throws, a lot of short plays. Both of these sides both of these sides of the ball were being fair. Both of these teams offensively were being very conservative. Defense was really stepping up and trying to make some plays as well. Now, I did think Will Howard had, his nice first 2 touchdown passes of the day. And then once they really got that successful run game play off or really established in this one, they'd go over the top, they'd air it out. And, I'd really say if Ohio State didn't squander their first drive, they're up potentially 17-3, maybe 21-3 in this game. And I don't know if you saw this as well. well, Alan, kind of another testament to them not playing well up to the, the number 4 ranking. It just felt like they really weren't taking advantage of the opportunities that were in front of them. I mean, you had an awful missed field goal. I felt like they were lucky to recover Will Howard's second quarter fumble. And then Nebraska just kept running these low percentage screenplays that Ohio State was snuffing out left and right, really to almost no reasonable avail to take a lead for Nebraska. And again, you have the chance to possibly be up 20-3 or 28-3 when you see how these teams play out. I know you saw the end zone pass interference call that the PI call. These refs just keep barking up these questionable calls. We had another ticky-tack targeting call as well. But again, if you lower the head, if someone's helmet pops back, they're going to literally review it. And it feels like 9 out of 10 times, 99% of the time, they're gonna call it targeting. And then you go in 14-6 at the half. Really far from what this score could have been. Far from what this score could have been.
Absolutely.
And when you look at how it's playing out, Ohio State letting Nebraska hang around in this game by not scoring. Then they throw in almost pick 6. But then Nebraska turns around with the offensive play calling that really was not ideal at all. It wasn't effective as enough as it could have been. They squander another prime field position, really due to ineffective, boring play calls. And this is an Ohio State defense we're talking about here. I understand just 2 weeks ago they gave up I think it was 2 weeks ago. They had a little bye week. I know this Ohio State defense just gave up almost 500 yards to the number 1 team in the country in Oregon, but they came back and they really stood it up here, not even allowing 250 yards, or I think 280 yards of total offense in this game. Now, you see Nebraska's playbook. Of course, it kind of starts to open up towards the end of the third quarter, but you had the overthrows by Raiola. Of course, you had the interception at the end of the game. So that's something that Ohio State's very thankful for. But I thought Nebraska, Allen, was the more gutsy, the more aggressive team as the game went on. And you kind of saw Matt Rule stepping up to the occasion against Ryan Day. It was really nice to see, man. We really had a show off here. I think one of the biggest things that jumps out to me, though, Ohio State had 64 rushing yards in this game.
Absolutely.
That's with Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Junkins in the backfield against a team like Nebraska, who just got blown out by Indiana and had over 200 rushing yards put up by Indiana last week. Now, I understand it's, a little bit of a different, outlook here with these teams, but I think Ohio State having 64 rushing yards is a big thing that, you really take a look at. I thought the best play call of the game, reasonably, was when Quinshawn Junkins got that little double move touchdown pass. It kind of made Ohio State feel a little more secure as they were able to get into the end zone. Shout out to the Nebraska defense, though, man. I'm going to talk a little bit about these two defenses here, and then we'll get our final statements before into the next game. Nebraska's defense, 285 total yards of offense, only 64 rushing yards allowed on 31 carries. That's 2.1 yards per carry. In case you didn't know, Quinshawn Junkins averages 6.9 yards per carry, and Travion Henderson at 8.2. So these guys had to adjust. Ryan Day had to make these adjustments. The offense had to adjust to what Nebraska's defense was showing them, but then you have Ohio State obviously playing their real big style of, a Big Ten defense as well. After allowing almost 500 yards of offense to Oregon, Ohio State gives up 273 yards of offense to Nebraska, 13 tackles for loss as well. So I think if you look at the bird's eye view of this game and what really happened, I just really thought that, Ohio State left too many points on the board. They kind of got bailed out by Nebraska's bad play calling. And let's be real, Dylan Raiola is a freshman at the end of the day. He is going to have some things to learn in this offensive system. And as 19 years old. And as he goes through this, college football landscape, it's going to be some things that he has to improve on. Matt Rule's going to go through the growing pains as well. So it does feel a little lucky for Ohio State to escape this one, all things considered.
I can agree with you there. One thing I wanted to point out before we get out of here, number one, the fourth quarter drive where they get the 2-point play. I mean, love that. And then also another thing I wanted to point out, Nebraska did it to themselves. It wasn't necessarily, like you said, the Ohio State defense that held them to field goals. It was Nebraska's fault. And not to mention penalties. They had way too many. At 7, I believe. Yep. But they were doing well on first down, well on third down efficiency. I mean, I think they went 5 for 16 on third down conversions, 18 first downs. I mean, they were playing really good. It didn't work out for them.
Right. Yeah, checking in on those third down conversions here. Yeah, Nebraska was 5 for 16. Ohio State 1 for 10 on third down, 1 for 12 on fourth down. Kept the penalties kind of low as well. Like you said, Nebraska did have a good bit of penalties in this game, 7-4 for 62 yards, damn near as many penalty yards as rushing yards that
Right.
what's it called? Ohio State had in the game. Brian, thank you for the comment as well, man. I was hoping you were going to jump in here tonight.
Awesome comment.
Brian Muck in the comments. He's a huge Ohio State fan. He actually had the blessing of going to that Oregon Ohio State game, man. They had an absolute blast. Got to see one of the games of the year in Oregon for sure.